Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. My name is Hollow and it's time to talk Bone Spirit. This build is considered one of the strongest builds around for its raw damage, and it's finally time for me to try it out and make my own version. To cut to the chase, as you can see, Bone Spirit is nuts. It hits for like 5+ million damage every single hit with this build, which of course murders next to everything in one single use, even at tier 40+ nightmare dungeons. It creates a very satisfying feeling of walking around and controlling a fight, setting up shortly, and then landing an outrageously strong burst of damage. This cleans out groups of enemies so effectively, especially those really strong elites that can be a pain, like for me as a range build normally, having to deal with the nightmare affix suppressors, well, it just crunches those. You can improve its mob clear through uniques, such as the chest piece we're going to talk about, that provides a Bone Spirit for free when you pick up some blood orbs. But it's not perfect. The setup requires careful play, which is certainly more effort than its competitor, the Bone Spear build. Some people do call the Bone Spirit build the natural progression of Bone Spear, because the numbers are simply bigger, but I think there's more to it than that. Overall, I am extremely impressed with its damage and general gameplay. I'm really enjoying playing it, just dealing so much damage in one button press. It's so satisfying to take, say, a tier 40+ final boss and just one-shot it. In general, it's a nice change of pace from Bone Spear, and it's very clearly competitive. I'd rate both builds as top tier, easily the best two options for Necromancer. How do I rate them against each other? Well, let's explain the build and how to play it, and at the end, we'll talk about that conclusion. We'll do a quick rundown of the talent tree and get into everything from there. We pick up Reap, enhance it, and then go for Acolyte's Reap so that we can spawn a corpse consistently with this attack every 5 seconds. It also works as nice essence generation in dire situations. On the next tier, we pick up 3 out of 3 Unliving Energy as always to improve our maximum essence, and with Spirit compared to Spear, we don't need imperfectly balanced because it's not a core skill. Of course, we're going to pick up Hued Flesh to get some corpses spawning whenever relevant, but we move on to the next tier here where we actually pick up 1 level of Blood Mist and go for the Enhance and then go for Dreadful Blood Mist. This actually gives us some Fortify, which is going to reduce damage taken by 10% while fortified, and there are ways this will even increase our damage. It's nice survivability though when you come out of the Blood Mist. You can see that I've got 2 levels in it, not 1 like I just mentioned. That's because it's kind of a final point that we'll mention at the end. And of course we also pick up Bone Prison here. It's also a massive essence generator, and we can also make them vulnerable, making them take 20% increased damage, which is a nice way to get that in this build. In the next tree, we're just picking up Death's Embrace. Close enemies deal 9% less damage to us for some survivability, and also the 6% times increase to damage, which is awesome. On the next tree, this is where we spend most of our points. First up, Corpse Tendrils. We 5 out of 5 this because that lowers its cooldown. This is basically something we want to use on cooldown, so reducing the cooldown is great. But it's also key to how we get crit chance, which we'll talk about, and it provides some CC and stun, which is awesome when enhanced, and provides us with blood orbs at a 30% rate when used. You use that on a pack of enemies, that's a lot of blood orbs, and that is relevant. We also, of course, in the Bone Spirit build, pick up 5 levels of Bone Spirit. As you can see, I'm at rank 11 out of 5 though, and that's for a good reason. We'll talk about that in the gear section. So we enhance it, which helps reduce cooldown on crits, and then we go for Dreadful Bone Spirit. This is because when you use a Bone Spirit, it consumes all of your essence. But with this perk, you get 30 back in the next 4 seconds, and there are ways to enhance that. We also pick up all 12 points of the bone passives: Insuration, in Compound Fracture, in Evulsion, and Rapid Ossification. This helps with crit chance. The higher your essence, the more crit chance there is, increasing bone skill damage by a multiplier, increasing damage by a multiplier to vulnerable, and Rapid Ossification, which as we spend 100 essence, we reduce the cooldown of bone skills, such as Bone Spirit, Bone Prison, Bone Storm. This is an amazing skill because we use all of our essence anyway when we use any Bone Spirit, so this is always working. And lastly, in this tree, we're also picking up 3 out of 3 Necrotic Carapace, giving us further fortified. Survivability is going to be really important. On the next tree for the ultimates, of course, we're picking up Bone Storm and enhancing it to make it a damage reduction while active, and the 20% increase to crit strike chance. This helps us get to 100% crit consistently. It's a sacrifice build, so stand alone to reduce damage, and of course, improving the benefits of sacrifice bonuses. Finally, the key passive, Ossified Essence, is going to radically increase our damage when we are above 50 essence and even more at max. This all leaves us with 1 point spare, and that's why I dump it into Blood Mist, as it does slightly reduce the cooldown. Then we have the Book of the Dead, which is actually the same as my Bone Spear build. For the warriors, we pick Defenders to give us some extra resistance. I will highlight that if you're struggling for crit, which you shouldn't be when playing this build, but if you are, you could go the Skirmishers for 5% there. For the Skeletal Mages, we're going Shadow to improve our maximum essence. The higher essence we have, the more damage we do. And then finally Golem, no surprise there, it's still the Iron Golem for the 30% times increased crit damage. It's insane. But now we come to the interesting one, the Paragon boards, where I've got a lot to say about glyphs. Either way, for the beginner board, we make our way up and to the right to pick up the prime node, coming around and up to the glyph, where I have Territorial, which is a phenomenal damage reduction against close enemies perk. We need survivability in general as a Necromancer, and especially in the higher tiers of 40+. It also increases your damage to close enemies the more decks you have, and that is fantastic. However, I will actually move this glyph later on, as we'll talk about. Either way, I come up to the right and pick up Preservation, and then move around to the left and pick up Knowledge, and leave the board to our first board upgrade. At which point, we're going to be picking up the legendary node or legendary board, Bone Graft. Just like Bone Spear, it's basically the same thing. Hitting enemies with bone skills increases your damage by 1% and your maximum essence, which is obviously phenomenal for the Bone Spirit build. To get that, we just come around to the right, picking up, say, Entomb, as well as the legendary node itself. Then we come up and around and come to Calcified. Before progressing on, we come down and to the left to Reinvigorate, improving our maximum essence, which is amazing, and providing essence on kill, which is majorly how we recover Bone Spirit's expense of all of your essence when you use it. So we pick up all the magic nodes here to help with essence on kill and maximum essence. Then we come up to the glyph socket, working our way up like so, and eventually coming around to the left to activate it. Here we have the no-brainer choice for this build, Grave Keeper. It improves your bone skill damage, it provides intelligence, and for every close corpse, massively improves your damage, 12% times a multiplier, and it's above 10%, which is the cap you normally see. So this is a huge damage increase because we're not using corpse explosion, meaning there are corpses around us pretty much constantly. It's only a 25 dex requirement, so you pick up all the dex around that, and of course we come up to Shaper of Bone to grab that for more bone skill damage, and of course I pick up this node for the extra resistances. Once I get this to level 15, I will be further picking up more dexterity nodes. Once we're done with that though, we come down to the left to get our third board. This board is the Scent of Death board. This legendary node is really cool. With at least 2 corpses nearby, you gain 15% damage reduction. Just flat 15%. That's amazing, and a huge survivability perk when we really need it as a Necromancer. With no corpses nearby, you deal 15% increased damage, and that's a multiplier, so that can be absolutely outrageous. It's true that most of the time there's going to be corpses near you, but to start a fight, there's a good chance you use Reap to spawn 1, then you'll corpse Tendrils to pull, then there will be no corpses as you Bone Spirit, which will massively increase the damage of that initial opening Bone Spirit. That's incredible. And we'll go further on that as we originally enter the board by going down and working our way down to Ruin, which as you can see deals 25% increased damage to healthy enemies. This is really cool because we don't really have any extra damage to healthy enemies normally. So even though it's additive, 25% to nothing is actually a lot. So your opening Bone Spirit of the fight will absolutely crush with the benefit of Ruin and effects like that, such as no corpses being nearby as well. Either way, we're going to pick up all the magic nodes around that, come around and actually pick up the legendary node itself, then come to the left and actually get to the glyph. Here I'm picking up Undaunted. This is for a very specific reason. Originally, I wanted to pick up Exploit. It basically enhances your damage to vulnerable targets, which is great, but it requires 25 dex. On this board, there is not 25 dex to pick up until you enhance the radius to actually reach further, and then there'll be enough dex. And the thing is, I'm absolutely crushing enemies anyway, so I don't really need more damage. What I kind of need is survivability. So as a filler slot, I found that Undaunted is actually great because I'm fortified constantly in this build. It means I get an extra 10% damage reduction for the more fortified that I have. And it also increases my damage when fortified, which is nice, but not that important. So here's where it gets interesting. What am I going to do now, as that is a temporary slot, and the fact that I want to move Territorial? The Sacrificial Glyph is easily one of the strongest just straight consistent damage increases. You deal 10% times increased damage while you have no active minions. That is a massive damage increase permanently because we don't have any minions in this build, but it requires plus 40 intelligence, which is so much. And in most cases, pretty much all, you will not be able to get plus 40 of any stat without improving the radius of that glyph. So this needs to be at least level 15 upgraded before you can really get the true value of this. So I use these glyphs I've just shown you, and once that's in place, I will begin upgrading Sacrificial. When that's at plus 15, I'm going to slot that here where Territorial is and move Territorial into the place of Undaunted. That will provide us with a massive DPS increase. But in the meantime, I still want to get good benefits that are activating with just 25 stats, so that's how I've done it. When I finally get enough Paragon points to get to a 4th board and have completed my first 3 as well, I'm going to have a 4th glyph slot. The question is, will I go offensive or will I go defensive? So depending on that, I'm going to pick from 2 options. I'm going to recommend either Blood Drinker, which causes blood orbs to fortify you, which we generate a bunch of them whenever we do corpse tendrils. That's a really nice defensive option if you need it, which you probably will as you go into tiers 50 and beyond in the Nightmare dungeons. Or Control, which increases your damage dealt to crowd control targets and 10% times increases your damage to slowed or chilled enemies, or 20% times increase to stunned or frozen. So when you pull in with corpse tendrils, you're going to absolutely destroy anything hit. It's a question of, do you want more damage or do you want more survivability? To be honest, I think you're going to want the survivability in the mega high tier Nightmare dungeons, but everywhere else, you might want control. Alright, time for the big one. It's the equipment. Starting with a weapon. You're going to want a 2-hand weapon because, like the Bone Spear build, you want as much crit strike damage as you can get, and a 2-handed sword provides that as its main passive. As you can see, plus 52.5% critical strike damage. That's amazing. We want a 2-handed sword. Of course, we want to improve our corpse tendrils as much as possible, so it goes on a 2-handed weapon. Grasping Veins, the aspect, gives you up to 40% increased critical strike chance for 6 seconds whenever you cast a corpse tendrils, which we should be doing constantly. This is a major boost to our crit strike chance, and we want 100% pretty much the whole time, and this is vital for that. Further, it means we get to deal up to 120% times increased critical strike damage to those damaged by corpse tendrils, so this is ludicrous and easily the thing we want on our weapon. On our helm, we have the all-important Disobedience aspect, providing us with a nice spike of armor whenever we deal damage, stacking up, keeping us alive, and allowing us to tank. And I just realized that I completely forgot to socket my chest, so that's not good, so I've just done that. Speaking of our chest, it's a unique chest, the Blood Artisans. When you pick up blood orbs, a free Bone Spirit will be spawned, dealing bonus damage based on your current life percent. So the healthier you are, the harder it hits, but it's ultimately not usually as strong as your normal Bone Spirit. This is a very powerful unique because it's going to massively enhance your clear time for general mob clear, but you're going to be sacrificing some survivability. The aspect I was running prior to this, just like on my Bone Spear build, was the Shielding Storm perk, where it makes our Bone Storm not only reduce the damage we take while it's active, but also provide up to a 5% barrier of our base life for 10 seconds. That is very good, very powerful mitigation. Or you can get a different type of barrier, such as the Protector aspect, generating a very solid barrier depending on your role for 10 seconds every time you damage an elite enemy, and that can happen every 30 seconds. Either of these is going to be a great way to get some mitigation through barriers. I'm having to sacrifice that mitigation to have this unique on. It's undeniable that this is increasing my damage because it gives me 3 to 4 ranks of Bone Spirit, which is insane, and an extra Bone Spirit pretty regularly for a free burst. But as I go into higher tiers of Nightmare dungeons, I'm finding I need more and more survivability, and having this mitigation from either of these aspects is definitely desirable. So I have to play extra careful when I'm missing that and using this unique. I hope that helps you feel a bit assured that you don't necessarily need this. Of course, it's a damage increase and improves your clear, but it might be, in many cases, better to have more mitigation. Next is the gloves. Another no-brainer here. The Retribution aspect is nuts for this type of build. You're dealing increased damage to stunned enemies. We are stunning enemies before blasting them with Bone Spirit. This is just ridiculous. Up to 40% times increased damage to stunned enemies is insane. Next, my next unique. Temerity. This provides me with a barrier. As I overheal from, say, picking up those blood orbs, I can get up to 80% of my maximum life as a shield for 8 seconds, and that happens a lot. So if you don't have this unique, you could pop on one of these defensive aspects, as I've mentioned, to help get some mitigation in this slot. But of course, this is a great unique for defense. Then we have the boots. Nothing too interesting about this one. We have Explosive Mist, which basically means my Blood Mist, my iframe, can pop corpses for damage. And more importantly, it reduces its cooldown slightly per every single corpse we use. So it just helps us get our iframe back more often, and that also provides some fortify. So it's nice synergy, but it's not amazing. But it's about the best we can get. So next we have the Amulet. Of course, we're going for Serration, just like the Bone Spear build. This can nearly double your damage by having it. You want as high as roll as possible, and we want to improve the power of this effect by by putting it on the amulet. It'd be great if we could have it on the weapon, but we kind of have a more important aspect there. Then we have the rings, where I actually don't have the ideal setup. I just can't seem to get what I want to drop. Here I have the loop of Torment, which is going to enhance our essence regen by up to 30% times for 4 seconds. That's obviously really helpful because we need loads of resource generation in this build. But just as I explained in my Bone Spirit endgame build, the aspect of Umbral is better, providing 1 to 4 of your primary resource when you crowd control an enemy. If you roll, say, a 3 or 4 version of this aspect, that is going to be significantly more essence than the loop of Torment and its effect there. The problem is I just can't seem to get one to drop, and so the Codex version of the aspect only providing 1 isn't that great, and I think this is better. So if you have the Umbral, use it if you've got a good roll. Lastly, the exposed flesh aspect is another no-brainer, up to a 10% chance to generate essence when hitting a vulnerable enemy with your bone skills. So we pull in the enemies, we bone prison them to make them vulnerable, and then we blast them, which then provides us with a shed load of essence instantly. This is absolutely required for this build in my opinion. I also want to highlight something that probably will come up in the comments. The Swelling Curse aspect improves the damage of Bone Spirit. You'd think I would have this, right? It increases the damage it deals based on distance traveled. The problem is we're walking up very close to the stunned targets to blow them up, minimizing how powerful this actually would be. And we would have to give up another aspect of which there are none I'm willing to give up. So for me, I like the idea of this, I just can't fit it into the build. But now it's time for us to talk about the skills on your equipment. There is a lot of different skills you want and in fact require for this build to work. You need enough critical strike chance to make this work in the first place, so you're always, next to always, critting with your Bone Spirit. Otherwise it's literally not worth using. So if you can get crit strike chance on anything, get it. Second to improving your crit strike chance, you want to improve your crit strike damage like we have on our weapon here, and of course damage to stunned enemies, which we're stunning all the time. When it comes to resource generation skills then, you want maximum essence #1 priority, and then anything that helps with resource generation, if it's flat resource generation or chance to give you resource. For damage reduction, you want raw damage reduction or reduced from close enemies, reduced from far, or while fortified, or max health increases. Core stats is always going to be intelligence priority, then dex and will after that, and reroll any strength. Then we have the all important skill increases like +4 ranks to Corpse Tendrils and +3 ranks to Bone Spirit that I have on my boots here. This is insane. Boots is the best one for this. This is where you can get the most levels of this type of thing for this build. I actually got +3 ranks of Bone Spirit on this, then rerolled another skill to find Corpse Tendrils, and we got +4. So I am thrilled with this piece. And then the other thing you'd be looking for is cooldown reduction to help you always have Bone Spirit ready and reduce your major cooldowns of Bone Prison, Bone Storm, that type of thing, Corpse Tendrils, as much as you can. For gems, you can see that I'm still using rubies in my armor for max life. We improve our overall health, which is amazing, and the more health you have, the bigger the shields, I believe, that generate from your health pool. We have sapphires in our weapon to improve our crit strike damage to crowd control enemies, and still skulls in the jewelry for the armor that provides. Now let's cover how this actually works and the gameplay behind it. I'm going to do this quick and then I'll explain it slow. Basically, we're going to use Reap to spawn a corpse, pull them in, Bone Storm and Bone Prison, and then smash them with our Spirit. So as you can see, I'm going to generate a corpse with the Reap, pull them in, buff up, smash them, prison them, and then hit them with the Bone. The Bone Spirit, which they're already dead because these are normal enemies. So let's look at footage of actual gameplay. So as you can see, with an actual pack of really scary elites and a proper high tier dungeon, I'm setting up the fight, generating some corpses for Reap or other methods, Corpse Tendriling to pull them in, which skyrockets my crit chance, and depending on the situation, I will have begun the fight with a Bone Storm to give me some damage reduction, or pop it at this point to increase my crit strike chance if they're a high health enemy like a boss or scary elite. If I want a full commit, I will pull them in and then Bone Prison them to make them vulnerable to increase my damage, again if they're really scary elites or bosses in high tiers, and if I want to generate a lot of essence immediately after killing whatever's alive because I think there's another pack coming quick. This can happen with events where you kill a pack of enemies and then another one spawns immediately. After that, there are two options. The first option is to use a few Reaps while pulling in with my next Corpse Tendrils to generate essence. The stun lasts quite a while actually, so I have plenty of time to slap them with Reaps and get lots of essence if I'm in a bad situation and have to do that. Or most often, I'll just walk around or through the pack of enemies picking up blood orbs. This, with my unique chest, will send out some free Bone Spirits and destroy anything alive. If it's a pack of enemies, I can dash through them to do that, or I can just blood mist to iframe and ghost walk through them. So yeah, it's spawn a corpse using Reap or other methods, pull them in with the Corpse Tendrils of that, then decide how hard are you going to go. Will they all die with a Bone Spirit here? Or will you need to buff up with Bone Storm? Will you need to Bone Prism? Will you need to do both? In high tiers, it can be pretty scary, and I try to have Bone Storm pretty much active at the beginning of every fight with elites, because otherwise I might die and I need that damage reduction. It's up to you to work out how hard you need to commit to each Bone Spirit cast, but the main priority is keeping yourself alive, because usually Bone Spirit with just Corpse Tendril pull is enough to kill everything. But there you have it. It's time for a conclusion on this. I think this build is fantastic, and I'm really enjoying playing it. But is it better than Bone Spear? Well, Bone Spirit obviously hits harder. It one-shots. It has way higher burst potential. And as you can see, it one-shots final bosses in higher tier dungeons. At face value, this is just better. But Bone Spirit requires more setup. With Bone Spear, you can just kind of throw them. Of course, you want to do things to enhance the damage, but there's nothing wrong with just throwing them, spreading vulnerability, and destroying everything. It's more consistent DPS, basically. Also, you can use Bone Spear more at range, which can keep you alive in the scarier tiers. Further, I believe Bone Spirit runs at a generally slower pace, which will be worse at lower levels of gameplay where there's not really any threat. But I actually think it becomes more impactful and a good thing in the higher tiers of Nightmare Dungeons, the true end game of this gameplay, where going slow is going to happen anyway because you need to clear mobs and packs to make sure that you don't die. So the faster pace of Bone Spear won't really matter there, will it? I think Bone Spirit is a harder build to play, but a very high potential rewarding build. Bone Spear is generally smoother and faster at mob clear, but just won't hit as hard. I would recommend you try both to get an idea of how they both feel and pick the one that you like best. But just keep in mind, Bone Spirit takes a bit more to learn and is harder to play, so don't judge either of them until you're actually good at both of them. But yeah, that's Bone Spirit and my endgame build currently of it. I hope the information in this was useful to you. I spent all day working on this. There's still more that I'd like to test, like I say, with different Paragon boards and certain glyph combinations. But if you have any extra advice for other Necromancer players, then you can drop it in the comments. You might just help someone. For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.